To talk about the latest developments in this divorce, we welcome from London, Helen Thomas. She is the CEO and founder of BlondeMoney. Also from London, the director of the Bruges group, Robert Oulds. Here in the studio, Suzanne Lynch is the Washington correspondent for the Irish Times, and Klaus Larres is a professor of history and international affairs at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Welcome to all of you. Helen Thomas, for months we've been told that there would be no new offer on the table from the European Union, and basically Brussels told London there is a deal, it's on the table, that's all you're getting. But now we hear that there have been negotiations, there is a new deal. That deal has to be ratified by the British Parliament, but what's changed?
That is a key question, really, isn't it, after 6 months on from Theresa May's last attempt to get a deal? Well, in terms of the detail of what is in this version of the withdrawal agreement, there is a significant change, of course, on the Northern Ireland Protocol. In terms of a backstop, it is now a front stop. It is already determining how Northern Ireland will face two kinds of customs regimes, and then there's a consent mechanism to enable the Northern Irish to make decisions for themselves. And then there's been some comments in terms of the future relationship that are different from the previous deal, particularly in terms of how Boris Johnson wants to pursue this, which is more of a free trade agreement, as so-called Canada-style agreement that he would hope to be the final relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union.
Robert Oulds, what do you make of this deal? Does it pave the way for Britain's orderly exit from the European Union?
Well, the deal is essentially, apart from your details laid out by Helen earlier, essentially the same in 90% of areas as the one negotiated by Theresa May, which was rejected 3 times by the House of Commons. This isn't really leaving the European Union, at least not straight away. Technically, we may be out, but essentially there would be important aspects on foreign policy, on fishing policy, on trade and regulatory policy, even on tax policy, let alone the issues to do with Northern Ireland, where Britain would still be under the influence of the European Union without actually having a voice in how those rules are made, at least for the transition period. And of course, anything could happen, anything could be negotiated or forced upon us by the European Union once the transition is over and we go for the future relationship. So this isn't really truly Brexit at all. And actually, if we were to leave on the 31st of October in just now 10 days' time, without the withdrawal agreement being in force, there would still be an orderly Brexit because a whole host of other agreements, contingency measures, kick in. So all this talk about an orderly Brexit or a deal or no deal, actually there's the withdrawal agreement, or there's staying in the European Union, or there's leaving with other contingency measures, about 40 or so other deals which cover a lot of the areas, which would automatically kick in and mean that there would be no cliff edge or no great disaster that would be facing Britain at all. We would carry on in most areas, and as long as businesses are prepared, know that they must produce paperwork when exporting, which is a lot of done electronically, there's no major issues to face. So really, we need to just dial down the rhetoric and not be so hysterical about the decision to leave the European Union, which was taken 3 years ago in a referendum and been endorsed by votes in Parliament, where they voted for legislation to take us out the European Union, to Suzanne, and the general election as well, which endorsed taking us out as well.
All right. Suzanne, do you agree that Britain will now have to be forced to abide by decisions taken in Brussels at a time when it has no say in those
Well, I think
decisions?
Robert is right in the saying that this is not the end of Brexit, whatever happens in the next 10 days, because what is going to happen, it now looks pretty certain, is that Britain will remain in a transition period until the end of 2020. And at that point, there's also an option to extend that even further. Now, that would be subject to Parliament on the EU side. So yes, in effect, nothing really dramatically is going to change, even if they do come out on October 31st. But within that period, and really, in many ways, the bigger question is now, what kind of trade relationship is Britain going to have with the EU after Brexit? And that's now going to be the focus. So if people think this has been a long process, in one sense, we've only done one part of it here. We still have to look, both sides need to negotiate a future trade relationship. Boris Johnson, as some other speaker just said there, Boris Johnson wants something like a relationship that the EU has with Canada, maybe a bit less so. But that whole issue about what kind of future trade relationship between Britain and the European Union is going to look like is going to now dominate debate after we get past this next deadline on October 31st.
Something I want to ask you about, Suzanne, and that is the backstop, because we've talked about this a lot on this show, which, as Helen pointed out, is now the front stop.
Yes.
How does that work? Does it effectively move the border to the Irish Sea?
Well, I suppose it does. And of course, we do need to say, now this is all predicated on whether this withdrawal agreement, everything goes through in the next few days or weeks. But yes, I think the Irish government very, very much welcomed the deal that was struck in Brussels last Thursday. And even though one could argue that the Irish government had to climb down on their demand that there would be a backstop and their demand that a withdrawal agreement would not be reopened. So in that sense, yes. But what the Irish government will say is that, for all intents and purposes, it is the same, even a better result than the original backstop, because, as Helen said there, it's actually front stop. It's not a contingency anymore. That's actually what's going to happen. And B, that essentially, and this is the problem for Boris Johnson and the DUP, the Unionist Party in Northern Ireland, they feel like they have been sold down the river. That essentially they are still going to be effectively part of the European Union in lots of ways that the rest of the UK will not be. So they were very annoyed that they felt that they were kind of, they had been loyal to Boris Johnson, but ultimately he was prepared to sell them down the river, as I say, and effectively put a customs border down the Irish Sea. So, but that means, people in the Republic of Ireland were quite happy, I think, with that outcome.
Okay. All right, let me bring in Klaus Larres. He's in North Carolina. Klaus, why, after months of telling the United Kingdom that there would be no new deal on the table, did the European Union suddenly say, well, okay, we're prepared to reopen negotiations, and have now come up with a new deal?
Yeah, let me just first perhaps say that I think there is a major change to the deal between Theresa May and the one Boris Johnson has negotiated. And that is, as Susan already said, that is the Northern Ireland problem. The DUP are absolutely up in arms, while the nationalists in Belfast love it. It is clear that Northern Ireland's link to the United Kingdom, to the rest of the United Kingdom, has clearly been loosened by that new deal which Boris Johnson has negotiated. So I think there's a major difference between the deal, the May deal and the Johnson deal, and we shouldn't forget about that. Why the European Union has agreed to that was because by pressure of the British government and by the offer to do something about the backstop. What the EU wanted to achieve, first of all, was that there would be no border on the island of Ireland, and that has been achieved. Whether or not there is a new customs border, and the DUP would say much more than a customs border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, that really is an internal UK matter. That is not something the European Union is particularly interested in.
I'll get to you,
on
Robert,
the
in a
island
moment.
of Ireland.
Robert, I will get to you. Go ahead, Klaus.
Yes, and that is the reason why, because the EU had its red lines, above all, no border on the island of Ireland observed, and therefore they could go along with renegotiating the deal, because the EU also wants to see an end to the process. I think most people in the EU have given up the idea that Britain will perhaps remain after all, or that there will be a second referendum or something like that. I think they now want to achieve as reasonable a deal with the UK as possible, and keep on sort of friendly terms with with the UK after the withdrawal has been achieved.
Okay. Robert, very quickly, as Klaus said, these are very significant changes that have been made to the original deal. Very quickly, your response.
Well, there already was a border on the island of Ireland. The Irish Republic already enforces customs checks on people who are potentially taking fuel across the border. Well as cigarettes, there's also border infrastructure to monitor that there's this fuel smuggling that doesn't take on. This is an issue that's been whipped up because the European Union made it very clear all along, we know this, the price from Guy Verhofstadt, from other things with Martin Selmayr, they said the price of leaving the EU was that we'd lose Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland would go into the orbit of the European Union and, of course, its proxy, the Republic of Ireland. And it is absolutely anathema to Brexiteers and to Unionists in Northern Ireland who are up in arms that they would put in a border, an internal border within the Irish Sea, which is arguably against the Treaty of Union of 1800, but the unified Ireland, NATO Northern Ireland with Great Britain.
All right, Robert.
And of course it breaches the Good Friday Agreement because it undermines the principle of consent. So it is actually a big change, as Suzanne was saying.
And Suzanne wants to say something. Go ahead.
The harsh political reality for the DUP, unfortunately, is that it's obviously not anathema to the Conservative Party because ultimately they signed up with it. And when it came to it, a lot of the hardliners, people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and allies of Boris Johnson, wanted Brexit done more really than keeping Northern Ireland completely in the Union. And this is, I think, the harsh political reality that the DUP are now faced with. I think the issue of the border between Ireland, the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, even Arlene Foster herself, last year I think it was, wrote a letter to London saying, you have to realise the unique nature of Northern Ireland. She accepted this is a unique situation. And even tonight, as we're sitting here now, in Northern Ireland domestically, they've been trying, they've reconvened in Stormont for the first time in 2.5 years to try and stop British laws like abortion and same-sex marriage from coming into effect in Northern Ireland. So essentially, sometimes it does suit political parties, certain political parties in Northern Ireland to be quite different than the mainland Britain. But look, I think you're right in that I think the DUP are in a very serious bind now because they do feel very let down here. They do feel that unionism has been undermined. And I think Boris Johnson has maybe opened a can of worms here that Scotland will now seek to maybe see a chink here and will try and push forward with some kind of referendum on Scottish independence quite soon.
I want to get to that in a moment.
I quite agree with that.
I want to get to Helen. Helen Thomas, Boris Johnson has now, of course, been forced to request a delay. He was forced through law in Britain to request that delay, and he also sent that other letter saying that he's not interested in a delay. Let's listen to what he said last month when he was asked if he would consider a delay.
Really, it costs £1 billion a month. It achieves absolutely nothing. What on earth is the point of a further delay? I think it's totally pointless. I'd rather be dead in a ditch.
So he's very much alive, but is he in a ditch right now?
Well, he's trying to dig himself out of that ditch, and if there's one thing that Boris Johnson's career has told us, it's that he is the ultimate salesman. So let's see how that proceeds. But I would say this, which is that his point about a further extension is a very key one for the Conservative Party. You know, since the extension in March, April, the Conservative Party plunged in the opinion polls through the fact that Brexit hadn't been delivered. Actually, it also affected the Labour Party significantly as well. So look, for both of the main parties, another extension is no longer costless. So actually, an extension is not that suitable all round in Westminster. And equally, for the European Union, as we were hearing there from Klaus, I think it was, about how, you know, hopes that perhaps a delay might cause the UK to reconsider. Now that is fading significantly underneath Boris Johnson's premiership, where clearly he does want to deliver Brexit. So look, we have, as we are talking here now, a big vote tomorrow in the Parliament in Westminster over whether the legislation to implement the withdrawal can all be completed before the end of the week, which would be a very quick timescale for legislation that is this complex. But you can understand why this 31st October deadline is so integral to Boris Johnson. And then you can also see, of course, that his argument to the EU is, well, what would be the point of a further delay when he is so close now to getting something done?
Klaus,
can I just get in and say, I think it is integral to Boris Johnson because he has repeatedly emphasized the importance of leaving on the 31st of October. He has dug himself in. That was totally unnecessary to write upon that all the time. And now, of course, he has observed, he feels he has to observe that deadline. But I think that is really a mistake of his own doing, which, and there's a lot of criticism in Parliament. When you listen to the debate in the House of Commons today, even conservative Conservative MPs were saying that to rush legislation, complex legislation through Parliament in just 3 days, that does not justify a proper examination of that legislation.
Okay.
So I think there's a lot of criticism. Why should that deadline be observed at all? Why not give it another month or two to investigate the legislation properly?
Yeah, Klaus, that request for a delay, there has been a response from both France and Germany. Let's listen to what they had to say.
It is now up to the British Parliament to say what it thinks about it. It is no longer up to the European Union, which has already said things. We therefore need a vote on the substance and not delaying tactics to save time. And I believe that President Macron has been clear on this matter. An additional delay is in no one's interest.
If there are problems in Britain with the ratification steps, then I would not rule out a short technical extension.
So it looks like, Klaus, that the Europeans are prepared to give the Brits a delay, the British
Yes,
a delay.
of course.
Yeah.
Yes, they are. And I mean, if it really was a matter of a technical delay of 1 or 2 months to allow the British House of Commons to pass that legislation, it would be unreasonable on the part of the EU not to grant an extension. And also the German finance minister Altmaier, confidant of Angela Merkel, has indicated similar things like Macron did. So I think it is almost a foregone conclusion that the EU will grant an extension, possibly up to 3 months. And even if they think that there might be a second referendum or that there might be a general election in Britain in the near future, they may even say, instead of granting another extension after 3 months, if things haven't been completed by then, they may straight away offer an extension of 6 months, which of course doesn't have to be taken up, but would be the maximum the EU is probably prepared to grant an extension.
Robert, what do you make of that? Will people who support Brexit would they tolerate that, the fact that you have these extensions all the time?
Well, there will be a great deal of anger within the United Kingdom. At the moment, people, according to the opinion polls, want Brexit to take place. The opinion polls range from 52 wanting Brexit to 48 against, and other ones 56 people who just want us to get on and leave the European Union. That is clear from the opinion polls. No matter how they voted, most people still support Brexit in the UK. And at this moment, Boris Johnson isn't getting blamed for Brexit not taking place. It is the Remain establishment and Parliament. So this narrative is working very well for Boris Johnson. And the European Union knows that if there were to be a general election, at the moment, as things stand in the opinion polls, Boris wins big, and then he has a mandate to do essentially whatever he wants. That's why the European Union have moved now and bit his hand off to get this deal. If there were to be another referendum, the anger would mean that if we took play, if we voted, that Leave would actually win big, because there is a disconnect between the elite establishment who want us kept in the EU and ordinary people who want us to get on, and Boris is popular. So long as we leave on the 31st of October with a withdrawal agreement or without, then things will be stand. But at this moment, it is quite clear that Boris Johnson is actually putting his party political interests first.
If they are so confident that they win big, if the Leave campaign is so confident that they win big, why not then go for a second referendum and give the British people another chance to vote on whether or not to leave the EU?
The first one hasn't been implemented. Why don't we just do the first referendum? Why not have a referendum every single year? The first referendum hasn't been implemented, and the only people, I gave you the opportunity. You asked me a question. You asked me a question. Allow me to answer. Give me the courtesy. You asked. Well, you asked me a question. Give me the courtesy of answering you. I allowed you to interject, and you didn't give me the answer, the courtesy to come back to you. We had a referendum. This needs to be implemented. Politicians, 80% of MPs were elected in 2017 with a manifesto commitment to honour the referendum result and take us out of the European Union. What we see now is attempts to frustrate, delay and ultimately cancel Brexit. That is not acceptable. We are not making this the best of three or the best of five. We are not going to have perpetual referenda. We are going to leave the European Union as we are, as we demanded.
Can I say something as well?
Very quickly. You've got 30 seconds, Klaus, very quickly.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it is undoubtedly clear that in 2016, many Britons didn't quite know what they were voting for. After 3 years of discussion,
they voted
everyone
to
knows
leave. Let's
what
end
is at
this
stake.
Robert, you had your chance.
Robert, perhaps they didn't know what they
Robert, you had
voted
your
for.
chance.
Did they vote? This is.
Robert,
I'm sorry,
Robert, can I say something as well?
Robert, you've got to give Klaus a chance to finish.
Robert, can I say something as
He's
well,
not
or is
qualified
it
to
just
comment
you
on
who's
this.
talking?
Go ahead, Klaus.
The information
You're not qualified
basis
to
now
comment on
is
this. You don't know why we
information.
voted to leave. You're not based
Can
in the
you
UK.
shut him up?
Well, we're going to have to turn your mic off, Robert, if you don't stop.
The information basis after 3 years of intense debate in the UK is a lot better than it was 3 years ago. People would be much better informed when they go to the polls and vote in a second referendum. So if everyone thinks they will win, if Remain thinks they will win, if Leave thinks they will win, why not just go for it and have a second referendum?
We're going to bring it to the studio, Suzanne. You have something.
Just to interject and finish, both sides have a point here. I think it is the case that Robert
is not qualified to comment on
okay,
why
Robert,
we
you've
voted.
had your say. One moment.
I think both contributors there have a point in that. I think Robert's right in that. The reality is that there is no parliamentary majority for a second referendum. So whether people think it's right or wrong that Britain should get the opportunity to go to the country again, there's never been a majority in the House of Commons, and it doesn't look like there still will be this week to push that second referendum through. So I really think that everybody can kind of see that it's probably not going to happen, you know, in terms of having a majority to allow that to happen in the House of Commons.
Okay. Looking at what's going on in Parliament right now, Helen, there is a development. The Labour Party may have another card up its sleeve. It is hoping to form a coalition with rebel members of the opposition, or the ruling rather, Conservatives, as well as with members of the DUP, that's the Northern Irish Party, who are unhappy with this deal. And in that way, they could force through amendments to make it a softer Brexit deal. Do you see that happening?
Well, I don't see that kind of an amendment actually passing. I mean, I would take it back actually to Suzanne's point there, and this is something that my analysis has shown. We took an MP by MP rigorous ranking of every single MP to look at their ideology on Brexit. And we constructed a picture of Parliament. And the truth is always there are extreme leavers and remainers on each side who can provide a wrecking minority to anything. And if you try and get a more central opinion or a centrist view, it is almost split in half by party. And so this is the constant problem, is that this Parliament, as constructed, cannot get anything done. It constantly says what it doesn't want, but it struggles to form a majority for what it does want. So we can talk about anything, like you've mentioned there, the customs union or some other potentially somewhat softer Brexit path. It is a severe struggle to get an agreement around any alternative path forward. And in any case, one of the ironies is because of this fact that there is no majority anymore in Parliament for anything, we are facing soon enough the inevitability of a fresh election. And I would add that whatever gets passed this week in Parliament, when we have that election and a new Parliament comes in, they can simply repeal or amend anything that gets agreed this week. So for all of the talk about the big votes of this week, it could turn out there's something of a charade, and this story has many more twists and turns to come.
Suzanne, one other spanner in the works, and that is the DUP, which have rejected this deal, are saying that this could ultimately lead to the reunification of Ireland. That's something they don't want. How much of a complication is that? Yeah,
it's not so much a it was potentially a threat they could use against Boris Johnson's government. If you don't look after us, you are going to lead inevitably to a united Ireland, and Northern Ireland becoming part of Ireland rather than part of Britain as it is now. But I think the reality, the political reality of Brexit is that it has made a united Ireland much more likely. Before Brexit happened, I think both people in the Republic of Ireland and in Great Britain were quite happy with the status quo, and the Good Friday Agreement had brought some stability, and Northern Ireland was existing as a kind of oxymoron, kind of hybrid entity, where people in Northern Ireland could be both British and Irish and claim both passports. Of course, as we know, the Brexit vote upended that. Nobody foresaw that happening. But the reality is now that I think it's not in the next 10 years, but you know, the Irish Foreign Minister, who's in his 40s, said last year that he believed a referendum on Irish unity or United Ireland could take place in his lifetime. So I think there are now serious concerns or serious thought being given to how that might work. Obviously, that would not be easy to implement, because what would happen then is kind of the reverse that's happened for the last few decades, which was you would have a sizable minority of people in Northern Ireland who don't want to be part of the full united Ireland, and Dublin would have to think about, well, how would we incorporate that into the Republic of Ireland? So even Sinn Féin, the National Party in Northern Ireland, have said we don't want a referendum straight away. There should be a lot of thought, a lot of discussion, a citizens' assembly, all these kind of things, to really seriously think over the next few years and decades how that might work.
All right, and we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.